Well, hello, my name's Louise Savage of Louise Savage Muses. A warm welcome if you're joining me for the first time in my musings slash ramblings slash wanderings, meanderings, and a very warm welcome back too if you are rejoining me. So I've had a fantastic reading month. I'm sure I'll be blabbing on about that before too long. But today I just want to fill you in on the book that I think has probably had the most impact on me this month. And that is The Incarnations. It's by Susan Barker. It's got a very sort of, I don't know if you can see, there's birds in flight. There's a sort of Chinese kind of landscape there. Now, Susan Barker wrote this novel. I just looked and I've forgotten already. When did she write it? Goodness only knows. So it's published in 2014. And she is, I think, half Chinese herself. And this novel absolutely fascinated me. It's one that I picked up in a charity shop. And I'm ashamed to say, I think I picked it up based on the cover. I just found the cover quite mesmerising. And I don't do that very often. I don't think I choose books on that. Or maybe I like to think I don't. And it's called The Incarnations because it's about a Chinese taxi driver called Wang. And he drives his taxi all over, I want to say Beijing. I read this a few weeks ago and already my mind is disturbed. And he's apparently quite an ordinary person, but actually the more you get to know him, the more you realise that he's had a really sort of quite unusual past. He was well educated, he went to university to do a history degree, and he's ended up driving a taxi, which is quite perhaps a little bit puzzling, a little bit intriguing. It's not necessarily the career path that you would expect. But the premise of the book is that these letters start appearing in his taxi. And the letters actually chart character in history from different characters across time. So there's a character in the very, very early sort of almost Neolithic era of China, kind of very primitive society that's represented with sacrifice and that kind of thing. There's a character from the age of the Chinese emperors, which I know was a vast span. There's a character from who's associated with the Red Army. So there's the book sort of takes you through these letters. You time travel to different eras of Chinese history. And I found that really fascinating. And the idea is that Wang is being addressed by this voice. You don't know who the voice is. They refer to him as you, which of course draws the reader in as well, because it almost feels like it's us. And the suggestion is that Wang actually has kept being reincarnated in each of these eras through time. So you get this fantastic scope of Chinese history, which I found fascinating, but you also kind of are really intrigued as to who is putting these letters in the taxi. There are some quite obvious suspects to start with, but there was what for me was a real twist right at the end, which I wasn't expecting at all. So this book kept me on my toes all the way through. It's brilliantly structured. So you dive into the past and then you're wrenched back to the present. And you don't want the present, you want to stay in the past. And then you're in the present and you're wrenched into the past and you don't want to go into the past because you want to stay in the present. So it's really, there are lots of fantastic hooks all the way through this novel that sort of maintain your interest. Some of the characters are incredible. Wang has he's got a wife and a daughter, and their sort of relationships are not at all straightforward. The daughter's quite young and she keeps seeing this character, like a ghost type character, And so you start to wonder if there's a connection between that and the letters. You know, is it that the daughter has some kind of sixth sense, or is she actually really seeing something? But of course, it's very easy for a parent to dismiss what a child is seeing. On the surface of it, he's got a very loving relationship with his wife. He's very, seems to be very much in love with her still, but there are question marks that start to develop about that relationship. His relationship with his father is fascinating. His father's an extremely wealthy Chinese man, but that relationship is very flawed and fractured and damaged. It's one of those books where I can't say too much, because if you're going to read it, there are too many potential plot spoilers, which will probably make this a very brief video, but there we are. And I really absolutely loved Wang's relationship with his stepmother, because she is not what she seems at all. So you kind of, you gradually get to know these characters in an awful lot of depth. By the end of the novel, I really felt I knew these people really, really well. There's also an old friend of Wang's who appears, who's a hairdresser, and they met in a psychiatric institution. That's all I'm going to say about that. And so that friendship begins to unsettle you and undermine who you thought Wang was. So, you know, is it a ghost? Is it some relative? Is it some lover? Is it some... We don't know who this person is all the way through the novel who's presenting these letters to Wang. And of course, it really destabilizes him. He has to start unpicking his own life and sort of becomes a detective of his own story as well. I don't know how she managed to write this. I don't know how... I need to sort of look her up and find out a bit more about her, because it's like a really, really complex jigsaw, the way that these different stories are intertwined and slotted together. And the other thing about it is you range all over China as well. You don't just stay put in one place, probably why my confusion at the beginning about whether it is Beijing or not. I think it is, where he's based originally, because it takes you to lots of different places, lots of different landscapes. You learn an awful lot in here about the plight of the ordinary, if there is such a thing, Chinese citizen, and particularly about poverty. I found some of the scenes in this novel really visceral. If you are, it's not for the faint-hearted, this story. It tackles some really, really brutal, gruesome events, but it does it in a way where you feel like you've witnessed it yourself. It's graphic, but it, you know, at one point I thought, is this necessary? Do we need this? But I think I think the novel is a huge comment on civilization, or the lack thereof, with humankind. You know, the fact that we, you know, you're going back to all these different eras where brutality has happened, but it's very clear that the world that Wang lives in is equally brutal in lots of ways. It's just dressed up differently. So I think this novel has a lot to say about humanity, about the lack of it, about what human beings are capable of. It would make a brilliant pairing with Doppelganger by Naomi Klein, which I've just finished for the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction, because in that she's kind of exploring a similar thing, you know, about the evil that resides within all of us and what we're capable of when we're under duress, about loyalty and how that can be put under test, and about our perceptions of others and the way that we view the world, and the way that we present ourselves as being powerless to change things, and yet we're not necessarily powerless. So I think it addresses an awful lot of those issues. So yeah, I thought this was a real masterpiece, and I don't know how it had passed me by. I don't think it's a book that I see in bookshops now, and I think that's a real shame. And I'll certainly be investigating Susan Barker and seeing whether there's anything else of hers that I might read in the future. She's definitely, from my point of view, a name to watch. So there you go. This is my book of the month. If you pick it up, if you've read it, please comment below. Let me know what you thought of it. If you haven't read it and you go away and read it on my recommendation, then I'm always really keen to know. And I know it's really hard for people to remember to do it, but if I've recommended a book and you've read it, I'd love you to feed back to me, because you know, I'm always interested in other people's perceptions, and I'm very aware that what works for me might well not work for somebody else. And also, if you feel that I've given you a false impression of a book or over-egged a book, I really, really would genuinely like to know. So there we are. That's The Incarnations by Susan Barker. If you go away and read it, I really hope you enjoy it. And happy reading wherever you are, whatever you're doing. Take care. Bye.